Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year-ahead horoscope forecast for Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising for the entire year ahead of 2023. All right, so I'm live streaming my horoscopes this year in order to get them out before the end of the year and in order to release some of my predictions about some of the major transits that are coming for you over the course of the next 12 months. So my horoscopes are primarily meant to be watched relative to your rising sign, which should be Sagittarius, although you can also look at them from the perspective of your sun sign, especially if you were born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you're born at night. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So here's the planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they'll get by the end of the year. So these are some of the major transits that I want to focus on today that I think are the primary planetary alignments that are happening in 2023, along with some of the dates associated with those transits that I'll mention during the course of this forecast. So let's focus right away on the very first major transit of the year, which is the Mars retrograde in Gemini, which is finishing up in your 7th house of relationships. So this is a transit that actually began last August when Mars first moved into Gemini and moved into your 7th house of relationships. But it really intensified around late October when Mars slowed down and stationed retrograde in that sign. So Mars can be kind of a difficult or a contentious planet, and when it goes through a person's 7th house, it can sometimes indicate a period of greater tensions or conflict when it comes to relationships. So sometimes this can mean just like fighting with other people more often, or getting in some heated arguments with a spouse, or in some extreme instances, it can indicate a period of severing or separation when it comes to relationships, depending on how things go and how your individual chart is set up. So as I said, this is a transit that we're already more than halfway through at this point because the majority of it took place in the second half of 2022, and we just recently passed the halfway point when we had the full moon in Gemini about a week ago, here in December of 2022. But the transit is going to reach another critical turning point on January 12th, 2023, when Mars ends its retrograde period and stations direct. And then from that point, it's just going to be in a sort of cleanup phase over the course of the next month or two until it eventually departs from Gemini and leaves your 7th house of relationships entirely on March 25th. So, the good news is that we're already more than halfway through that transit. Most of the major themes that are going to happen are probably already in motion, and you've probably already experienced them to some extent, but we'll just be in the sort of cool down or sort of wrap up phase of that transit over the first 3 months of 2023. All right, so moving ahead to other transits, I next want to talk a little bit about the Saturn transit, where Saturn is about to leave a 3-year transit in your 3rd house of communication, siblings, and short distance travel, and it's about to move into Pisces, which is your 4th house of home, family, living situation, parents, and your private life. So Saturn's ingress into your 4th house is going to begin a little bit more of a serious or potentially kind of heavy period when it comes to your home and living situation, where you may experience a period of restructuring the foundations of your living situation, essentially. So sometimes this can be motivated, or some of the challenges associated with this transit can be motivated as a result of some sort of like challenge or obstacle or difficulty that arises with respect to the living situation that you have to address or that you have to overcome in some way. But in the long term, it should help you to clear out some unnecessary baggage in this area of your life so that you can create a more solid or a more stable foundation over the course of the next 3 years. Because this is actually a long-term transit that's beginning in March of 2023, but it's going to last all the way until 2026. So pay attention to any changes in your home and living situation that start taking place in March, because even if they seem relatively minor at first, they may signal much longer term or major changes that will grow and develop over the course of the next year or two. Another area that comes up with this transit is the parents, and either some major events happening in their life or some major events when it comes to your relationship with your parents, and needing to revisit that and maybe address some issues from the past that you would sort of let linger, but at this point they have to be sort of met and addressed head on. So sometimes that can be kind of difficult. It can sometimes indicate a period where there's some distance or there's some coldness in the relationship between you and your parents. But ultimately, if you are able to successfully navigate this period of sort of coldness or tension or distance, you should be able to develop a more solid foundation for your relationship overall by the end of the transit. All right, so surmountable difficulties in the fourth house of home, living situation, and parents. That's one of the other transits that begins in March. Also in March, Pluto's going to dip into Aquarius for just a few months, which is your third house of communication, siblings, short distance travel, and neighbors. So this isn't going to be a major transit this year unless it's hitting personal planets in your chart right from the start. If you have personal placements in your birth chart that are early in the fixed signs. However, it's important to pay attention to because it may just signal some things that are going to come up in the long term over the course of the next couple of decades, because Pluto's actually going to spend about 20 years in Aquarius all the way until the early 2040s. But this is just a little initial 3-month preview basically between March and June. So the third house is things like siblings, extended relatives like aunts and uncles. It can also sometimes indicate neighbors. So for some of you, this is going to indicate an intensification and deepening of the relationship with some of these people, where you may have some sort of deep transformative experience in terms of your relationship with some of those figures in your life. This is coming off of a 3-year transit that you've already had over the past 3 years, where there have been some surmountable difficulties and maybe coldness or distance or seriousness in that relationship as a result of Saturn transiting through Aquarius in your third house. But this is a somewhat more intense transit where you're going to take kind of like a deep dive into some of those relationships and emerge from them with a much deeper understanding of the importance of some of those people in your lives. So sometimes this can be a little tricky. You might want to be careful about issues surrounding power or control or manipulation in this area when it comes to siblings, extended relatives, or even neighbors, because those are always potentials with Pluto transits. But ultimately, it doesn't necessarily have to be extremely bad or extremely good, just transformative in some way. This may also come into play a little bit when it comes to communication for you and learning how to communicate and use your words and the way that you communicate in order to wield power. Since power is like a major keyword for Pluto, you may find that your communication with other people is more powerful than at other times in your life, or where suddenly you start to understand at a deeper level the power of some of your words and the way that you communicate and how that affects people in your life, in your close day-to-day relationships. And coming to terms with that as you see your communication style changing over the course of the next several years as this Pluto transit really gets going in your third house. All right, so those are some of the more heavy transits early in the year, especially around the time of March. I want to focus now, though, on some of the more positive transits, such as the Jupiter transit through your fifth house, which is going to be taking place for the entire first 5 months of the year. So the fifth house is one of the more positive houses in the chart. It generally represents the area where we see people like children, either our own children or just the concept of children in our life and the role that they play more broadly. The fifth house also represents creativity and artistic pursuits, as well as pleasure, what we do for pleasure and joy or leisurely activities like games, as well as the broader topic of sex and sexuality in general. So with Jupiter going through this sector of your chart, this should be a period of growth and expansion when it comes to this area of your life in general. And it's actually a pretty positive transit because it just indicates a period that should be you should be having more fun, and you should be engaging in leisurely activities with a bit more gusto than at other times in your life. There was a brief preview of this transit last year when Jupiter dipped into Aries for a little bit, but this is one of the transits that's really going to dominate the first 5 months of the year of 2023, all the way through about mid-May of the year. Until mid-May is when Jupiter departs, and then it's going to move into Taurus. So we're going to return back to some of these fifth house themes when I come back to the eclipses. So I'll put a bookmark in that for now, and I'll move on to the other transit, which is Jupiter in the middle of May is going to ingress into the sign of Taurus, which is your sixth house of work and health. So this should indicate a period of growth and expansion when it comes to work matters and health matters. Generally speaking, this usually just means that the person goes into a period where if they've been struggling with some health issues lately, they're sometimes able to find remedies or ways to address those health issues so that things start going better than they had previously in that department. So this is going to be a transit that lasts starting in mid-May through the very end of 2023. So basically the entire second half of 2023 could be positive for addressing some health issues that you've had in the past. The sixth house is also work and subordinates, or people that work for you, or if you're working in a subordinate position to other people, it can just mean your workplace in general. So having a sixth house transit of Jupiter can just be a positive period where you're a little bit more successful and lucky at work, and where things flow a little bit more naturally and a little bit more easily for you in that department. So it's a relatively positive period for work and just your job in general. And if you're working for people in a specific workplace, some of those relationships, you may find somebody that supports you or is helpful in the workplace, so that you have kind of like a lucky or fortuitous meeting with somebody in that context. All right, so that's Jupiter transit in the second half of the year. Then over the course of the summer, the other major benefic transit that's happening this year is we're going to get a Venus retrograde in the sign of Leo. And this Venus retrograde is going to take place in your ninth house of education, philosophy, beliefs, religion, and foreign travel or exposure to foreign cultures. So your ninth house is up here at the top of the chart, Venus retrograde there. The ninth house really primarily has to do with one's belief systems and like what you believe in and what your sense of morality and ethics are. And over the course of the summer, essentially between June, when Venus first goes into Leo, until October, when Venus departs from Leo, you may see yourself rethinking and revising some of your belief systems, and especially through social contacts and through meeting and exchanging ideas with other people, or through a person who comes into your life at this time that becomes particularly influential or impactful in changing your views on something, you may see some of those views changing over the course of that few-month period. So the Venus retrograde, as I said, it begins in June, but it's the most intense period is going to be a period of about 40 days and 40 nights between July 22nd, when Venus stations retrograde, all the way until September 3rd, when Venus stations direct. That's really the sort of eye of the storm, or the focal point of this transit. So for some of you, this may indicate a period where you have a major trip, or you go out of town for some reason, or go to a foreign country. Sometimes with Venus retrogrades, relationships can be involved. So you may see a major relationship taking place in this period. And oftentimes with retrogrades, there's a backward-looking component where you look back to the past, or you go back to revisit something. So it may be that there's a person or a relationship that you look back to that falls in the ninth house, which has to do with education, philosophy, beliefs, religion, or other topics like that. And that for some reason you find yourself thinking about previous relationships, or in some instances revisiting them. And this in some way has some sort of impact on your overall outlook on life in some broader sense. So for those of you with night charts especially, that should be a pretty positive transit, where it's a period of growth for you, and it ends up being sort of lucky or successful in some way, rather than something that's overly dramatic or negative or something like that. It should be a pretty positive transit, especially if you take a trip at that time over the summer. All right, so that's the two benefic transits this year, the Jupiter transits and the Venus transits. The other major transits I want to focus on a little bit are the eclipses that are going to take place during the course of 2023, because eclipses always signify major beginnings and major endings in whatever sector of your birth chart that they fall in. So the first two eclipses, the first one's going to take place in Aries in your 5th house, and that's on April 20th, and the second one's going to take place in Scorpio, which is your 12th house, on May 5th. So the Aries eclipse is really just emphasizing the Jupiter transit that I already talked about in your 5th house of children, creativity, and sex and romance. So for some people, this is going to indicate a major beginning or ending in this area of your life. So for some people, for example, when they have eclipses in their 5th house, since it's the place of children, it can indicate that suddenly the topic of children becomes more important in your life for some reason. So some people, for example, have a child during this time, or get pregnant or something like that, because it's representing a major beginning and a major new chapter of your life starting. In other instances, for people that are a little bit older, if you already have children, it may indicate some sort of end of a chapter with respect to children at this time in your life, because eclipses are also major endings. But generally, because Jupiter is also transiting there, it should be a relatively positive one, even if things are kind of up in the air for a period of time, or kind of chaotic in the short term. So some people, for example, when they have eclipses in the 5th house and they have older children, a child will graduate from high school and go away to college, which will represent, the end of a major chapter in your relationship with that child and the beginning of a new chapter. So think in terms of that when it comes to those things. You may also want to pay attention to what sort of things you're doing for fun and leisurely activities during this time, because you could pick up a major new hobby that seems like just something you do for entertainment at first, but then it eventually ends up becoming a bigger deal in your life over the course of the next 6 months, since an eclipse is taking place there in your 5th house. It may also be a good time for a new significant romantic relationship, with having an eclipse taking place there at the same time in your 5th house. So that's one of the eclipses, and this is kind of connected to a whole series of eclipses, where the eclipses are shifting from your 6th and 12th house, which is kind of like the work health axis, especially the health axis over the past year, with eclipses in 2022 having been taking place in Taurus and Scorpio. And for some of you, this has been a major period where you've had to put more focus on health matters for different reasons, because the 6th can be bodily health and the 12th can be things like mental health. So we're going to see a continuation of some of those themes during 2023, but since this is the last two eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus that take place in May and October, it should be wrapping up a sequence of events that's been taking place at this point, rather than starting a new one. So if some of you have been going through a period of greater focus on mental or physical health, then some of that should start to reach a sort of conclusion during the course of 2023. The Scorpio eclipse in particular is more of a focus on mental health, because it's taking place in your 12th house, and it also has the potential of focusing to some extent on other topics like people that you don't get along with in your life tend to fall in the 12th house, and you may see some major developments there in terms of those relationships, either indicating a new beginning or a new ending when it comes to some of those people in your life and the role that they play with you. All right, so moving to the later set of eclipses, where we have the eclipse in Taurus in October in the health house, but also the work house. This may indicate a major beginning or major ending when it comes to your work and your workplace in general, where sometimes people start or end a job during those periods. But we've got one new development taking place at this point, which is the eclipse in the sign of Libra in your 11th house of friends, groups, and alliances. So this is opening up a period that's going to last for more than a year after this point, where the eclipses are going to start bouncing back and forth between your 5th house of children and enjoyment and creativity and your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So this is going to signify some major changes and a major new beginning or new ending when it comes to the topic of friends in your life. Suddenly friends are going to become more important and more of the focus in your life, starting with this eclipse in October. So some people end up making new major friendships that begin and start at this time, while other people find that there's certain friendships that have kind of reached the end of their life cycle and will kind of wind down or potentially come to an end at this point if that friendship is no longer serving you or is no longer necessary in your life at this time. So pay attention to just those keywords of major endings and major beginnings when it comes to friendship around the time of that October eclipse in the sign of Libra. All right, so just looking at everything, but it looks like this might be everything that I wanted to cover here in terms of my major keywords and major transits for 2023. So to summarize, some of the major keywords, just based on the houses that are activated in your chart this year, the primary topics that are going to be the focus this year are relationships, home, parents, potentially children, creativity or romance, all 5th house topics, and then also finally health, work, and friends. So those are the major transits and those are the major topics for you for 2023. And I think that's it for this horoscope for Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. So thanks a lot for watching this or for joining me in the live stream. I'm going to answer a few comments and a few questions in the live stream here over the next few minutes as I play the credits. But otherwise, that's it for this horoscope. So good luck, and I'll see you again next year. Special thanks to all the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Mimi Stargazer, and Jean-Marie Kaplan. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then please consider becoming a patron through our page on patreon.com. In exchange, you can get access to bonus content that's only available to patrons of the podcast, such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the monthly forecast episodes, our monthly auspicious elections podcast, or another exclusive podcast series called the Casual Astrology Podcast, or you can even get your name listed in the credits at the end of each episode. For more information, visit patreon.com/astrologypodcast. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, we have a list of recommended astrologers at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrologers on the list are friends of the podcast that have been featured in different episodes over the years, and they have different specialties such as natal astrology, electional astrology, synastry, rectification, or horary astrology. You can get a 10% discount when you book a consultation with one of the astrologers on our list by using the promo code AstrologyPodcast. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called Astro Gold for Mac OS, which is from the creators of SolarFire for PC, and it includes both modern and traditional techniques. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code ASTROPODCAST15 to get a 15% discount. If you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I'd recommend checking out my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, where I go over the history, philosophy, and techniques of ancient astrology, taking people from beginner up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. You can get a print copy of the book through Amazon or other online retailers, or there's an ebook version available through Google Books. I also recently published a new translation of the anthology of the 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, which is one of the most important sources for understanding the practice of ancient astrology. You can find that by searching for Vedius Valens, the anthology on Amazon or other online book retailers. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures as well as guided readings of ancient texts, and by the time you finish the course, you will have a strong foundation in how to read birth charts, as well as make predictions. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. I also recently launched a new course there called the Birth Time Rectification course, where I teach students how to figure out your birth time using astrology when the birth time is either unknown or uncertain. You can find out more information about that at theastrologyschool.com. Each year, the podcast releases a set of astrology calendar posters for the coming year, and we've just released our 2023 planetary alignments and planetary movements posters, which are now available on our website at theastrologypodcast.com/store. There you can also pick up our 2023 electional astrology report, where Lisa Scheim and I went through the next 12 months, and we picked out the single most auspicious date for each month using the principles of electional astrology. You can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2023 report. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com. Finally, thanks also to the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening May 25th through the 29th, 2023, just outside of Seattle. This year's conference is going to be a hybrid conference where you can either attend online or in person. Find out more information at norwac.net.